Lonely Rancher saved a girl from soldiers. He drew his bow and said, "She is mine." Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Arizona Territory, 1869. The desert sun hung low like a brand of fire pressed against the earth, unyielding and merciless. Heat shimmered over the cracked ground where nothing grew except thorn and stone. The Dragoon Mountains rose jagged and sharp in the distance, their shadows promising relief that never quite arrived. The air smelled of dust, sage, and something darker, like judgment waiting to fall. Eleanor Whitaker pressed her back against the sandstone wall of a narrow canyon, her once ivory dress torn to ribbons. The silk sleeves hung loose, smeared with sweat and streaks of blood from the iron shackles that bit into her wrists. Her golden hair, once set in the fashionable curls of a Charleston lady, now clung in damp tangles around her face. But it was her eyes, blue as mountain ice, that betrayed the truth. This was a woman caught between despair and defiance. For 3 days she had been hunted. Dragged from a stagecoach bound west, bound and thrown like stolen cargo across the saddles of men who laughed at her cries. She had seized her first chance to flee during a river crossing. Since then, she had stumbled through canyons and cactus groves, feeding on bitter prickly pear and muddy water, driven by nothing but the will to stay free. Her father, Colonel Edward Whitaker, had carved his fortune from silver mines and his reputation from frontier wars. He was a man who measured loyalty in blood and obedience in silence. When Eleanor refused the husband he had chosen for her, a cattle magnate twice her age, whose hands were stained with whiskey and cruelty, her father's answer had been simple. He sent word to Silas Garrison, a man who made his living in the shadow of law, and ordered his daughter brought back by any means necessary. Now Garrison's hired men scoured the desert for her, their spurs jingling and rifles ready, eager for the reward promised on her return. Each echo of hoofbeats through the canyon tightened Eleanor's grip on the shard of flint she carried. It was a poor weapon, but sharp enough to grant her one last act of defiance if they found her. She whispered into the burning air, half prayer and half vow. "Better death on these stones than life as another man's property." The laughter of the pursuers carried closer, bouncing off the canyon walls, coarse and confident. They spoke of her as if she were cattle gone astray, not a daughter, not a woman with a will of her own. Eleanor pressed deeper into the shadows, every muscle trembling with exhaustion, every nerve taut with fear. And then another sound, quieter, different, the whisper of moccasins against rock, moving with a precision the bounty hunters would never possess. Eleanor froze, her breath catching. From the rim above, a figure emerged from the heat haze like something conjured from legend, tall, lean, his presence carved of silence and purpose. His bow was in hand, his gaze sharp as obsidian. An Apache warrior. From her hiding place among the rocks, Eleanor's breath caught as she studied the warrior above. He moved like a shadow given form, measured, deliberate, as if the desert itself bent to his presence. His dark eyes swept over the canyon floor, not hurriedly, but with the patience of one who understood that survival demanded seeing what others overlooked. The bounty hunters below did not yet notice him. They joked, cursed, and kicked through brush, their laughter coarse against the stillness of the canyon. One of them, Jake Morrison, a grizzled tracker with a scar across his jaw, called out, "The lady's got no more than an hour in this sun. She'll crawl back to us before long. Garrison will have his prize, and the colonel will pay in silver." The men chuckled at the promise of coin. But Eleanor felt her stomach twist. Prize, property, words that stripped her of soul and dignity. She pressed the flint shard against her wrist, ready for the only escape left to her if they found her. Then the warrior moved. He stepped to the canyon's edge, where the blazing sky burned around him like a halo of fire. His bow was already raised, an obsidian-tipped arrow gleaming with promise. When he spoke, his voice carried low but steady, as if the stones themselves bore his words. "You trespass on Apache land. Leave now, or feed the vultures." The canyon fell silent. Morrison spat into the dust and squinted upward. "One Apache against 5 rifles? Wrong day to play hero, savage. We've got business with a runaway woman, and we'll take her with or without your blessing." Eleanor's heart hammered. The men shifted, rifles lifting toward the lone figure on the rim. She pressed her forehead against the stone, torn between terror and awe. The warrior's gaze flickered toward her hiding place, though he gave no sign to the others. Somehow, she knew he had already seen her, judged her chains and her fear, and found them worth his arrow. "The woman chooses her own path," he answered, voice cold with certainty. "If she runs, she has reason. Apache law protects those who seek freedom." The words struck Eleanor like cool water in the desert. Her path, her choice. It was more recognition of her humanity than she had ever received from her own blood. Morrison barked a curse. "Enough!" He jerked his rifle skyward. "Boys, put that red devil down!" But even before the trigger snapped, the warrior moved. His first arrow sang through the air, finding Morrison's shoulder before the gun could steady. The shot rang wide, echoing against stone. In the same breath, the Apache descended the cliff with fluid grace, becoming part of the canyon itself. The hunt had turned. And for the first time in days, Eleanor felt a sliver of hope pierce the suffocating heat. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The Dragoon Mountains loomed ahead, jagged teeth of stone cutting into the sky. The air thinned as they climbed, and the sun, though sinking westward, still pressed its heat into every rock and thorn. Clara's breath came in short bursts, each step heavier than the last. The desert floor had been merciless, but the mountains offered no mercy either, only sharper trials, sharper falls. Elias Greyhawk moved with the ease of one born to this land. His moccasined feet found purchase on ledges so narrow, Clara barely dared to glance at them. Where he went, she followed, though her skirts snagged on mesquite and tore further with each climb. Her hands were raw from grasping stone, her wrists still marked with the deep welts of shackles. Every heartbeat pounded the same refrain: "If I fall, I die." Behind them, faint but steady, came the echo of hooves. Garrison's men had not given up. They pressed forward across the desert floor, and once they reached the lower trails, there would be no more hiding. Elias had warned her, "We must cross the high pass before night. If they catch us on open stone, we are dead." The words haunted her now, sharp as the desert wind. Halfway across a narrow ledge, Clara's foot slipped. Pebbles skittered down the cliff, clicking against stone until silence swallowed them hundreds of feet below. Her body pitched outward, skirts catching the hot wind. For one terrible instant, she hung between earth and sky. A hand seized her wrist. Elias pulled her back against the wall of rock with a strength that brooked no argument. She collapsed against him, chest heaving, vision swimming with terror. His dark eyes, steady as the mountains, held hers. He said nothing, only nodded once, as if to tell her, "Stand, continue." Tears burned her eyes as she pressed her palm to the rock, whispering words her mother had taught her long ago.
I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust. Psalm 91:2. The verse steadied her breathing. She was no longer the trembling child who cowered under her father's command. She was a woman walking a path no one had chosen for her but herself. Step by step, she forced her body forward.
The ledge narrowed again, then widened. Each stone cut into her shoes, each gust of wind threatened to unmake her. But Elias kept ahead, pausing only to glance back, silent but present, as though his very steadiness lent her strength. By the time they reached a plateau, night was folding over the mountains. A crimson horizon bled into the dark, and coyotes called from the valleys below. Clara collapsed against a boulder, her arms shaking, her throat dry as dust. Elias crouched near, scanning the trail behind them. "They are still coming," he said, "but slower now. The mountain tests all men." Clara lifted her gaze to him, exhausted yet unbroken. "Then we must climb faster." For the first time, she saw the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. "Yes," he answered simply, "faster." And together they pressed onward into the rising dark. The following morning, the desert had turned from a furnace into a crucible. Heat radiated from the stones as the sun climbed, unforgiving, into its throne in the sky. Clara followed Elias along a dry wash where twisted mesquite trees clawed toward the light. Her lips cracked with thirst, her body aching from the climb of the night before. Elias halted at a patch of cactus, its pads bristling with spines. Without a word, he drew his knife and cut away a section, prying the flesh open with practiced ease. Clear water seeped from its core. He held it out to her. Clara drank greedily, the bitter liquid running down her chin, and for a moment the desert's grip loosened. She lowered the cactus shell, meeting his gaze with something close to gratitude. "You read the land as if it speaks," she said softly. Elias nodded. "It does speak, to those who listen. Every plant, every stone, every track, it tells a story. Out here, stories keep you alive." He crouched, pointing to the sand. A faint set of impressions curved across the wash, barely visible to her eyes. "Deer," he murmured. 2 days passed. They went toward the canyon where water waits. Clara blinked. "I would never have seen that." "You were not taught." His tone was neither harsh nor kind, only certain. "My people learn from the first steps they take. You will learn too, if you wish to live." For a long while they walked in silence, broken only by the crunch of stone beneath their feet. Then Elias spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "My sister once walked these same trails," he said. "Her name was Anaba. She laughed like running water. She was taken by soldiers near Fort Bowie. They called it war. I call it theft of a soul." Clara's chest tightened. She knew the tone of that grief, the way it hollowed every word. "I am sorry," she whispered. Elias's jaw set hard, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sorry does not bring her back, but it teaches me to guard others. No woman should be bound like cattle, stolen from her path." The words struck her to the core. For a moment she was back in her father's house, hearing him barter her life away to a man she despised. She shivered, though the heat pressed heavy. "My people also believe," she said quietly, "that life is more than what men decide. My mother used to say, 'The Lord made us in His image, and no chains can erase that.'" Elias glanced at her, brow furrowed. "Your God? He is the one who made the rivers and mountains?" "Yes," Clara answered, her voice firm despite the dryness of her throat. "The one who made all things, who gave us breath. You call Him the Creator. We call Him the Lord." Something softened in Elias's eyes. For the first time, it seemed the canyon between them was not so wide. They walked on, side by side, the desert still vast and merciless. But in that moment, Clara felt less alone, as though two faiths had touched in the wilderness, giving her strength to keep walking. By the third evening, the mountains gave way to a hidden valley, cradled between red cliffs and veiled by juniper trees. The air here carried the coolness of water, and the faint murmur of a stream reached Clara's ears like music. For the first time since her flight began, she felt the grip of death ease from her shoulders. Elias led her down a narrow path. Below, smoke curled from lodge fires. Children's laughter echoed against stone. Horses grazed near the stream, their coats glinting in the late sun. Clara's eyes widened. She had been told by her father and his men that Apache camps were savage lairs. But here she saw life. Mothers grinding maize, men mending weapons, elders gathered in quiet circles. Yet as they descended, voices rose, not in laughter now, but in warning. Figures stepped from the shadows, bows drawn, rifles lifted. At their head stood a woman whose hair was streaked with silver, her face lined by both years and storms endured. Her gaze was flint, unyielding. "Greyhawk," she said to Elias in her own tongue before turning her sharp eyes on Clara. "Why bring her here, a white woman? Do you invite death into our hearth?" Elias stood tall. "She runs from chains. She is no enemy." Murmurs rippled through the warriors encircling them. Some spat into the dust. Others glanced at Clara with eyes that carried grief older than she could fathom. Then another voice rang out, a younger woman, strong-shouldered, her braids bound tight. Morning Star. She stepped forward, spear in hand. "How many of our children have vanished because we trusted pale faces? How many fires burned because we opened our doors? You bring one more to finish what soldiers began." Clara's throat tightened. She felt their stares like arrows piercing flesh. Her body trembled, yet she stepped forward, lifting her chin though her voice wavered. "I am not here to harm you," she said, her words stumbling but sincere. "I did not ask to be dragged in chains. I did not ask to be hunted. I only want to live free. If you cast me out, they will take me again. If you let me stay, I will prove I can stand among you." The circle of warriors hissed, muttering. Morning Star's eyes narrowed, but she did not strike. Then a small figure darted through the ring, little fawn, no more than 10, with curious eyes that missed nothing. She tugged at her grandmother Red Sky's hand. "Let her try," the girl said in a clear voice. "If she fails, the desert will decide. If she lives, maybe the Creator sent her." Red Sky studied Clara in silence. For a long moment, the weight of judgment pressed like stone. At last, she nodded once. "She will face the trials," Red Sky declared. "Endurance, courage, wisdom. If she proves herself, she may stay. If not, the desert will take her back." The crowd murmured agreement. Elias exhaled slowly, relief tempered with caution. Clara's heart pounded, but she straightened her shoulders. For the first time, she felt her fate balanced not by chains or men's bargains, but by her own will. Morning Star wasted no time. As the sun climbed above the cliffs, she thrust a bundle of empty pouches and a stone knife into Clara's hands. "You will gather water, food, and wood enough for the night, alone. Fail, and you go hungry. Fail twice, and you leave our valley forever." Clara's stomach twisted. She had never built a fire in her life, nor tracked food outside a market stall. But she swallowed her fear and nodded. The warriors watched her like hawks as she stepped beyond the camp's boundary. The valley stretched vast and unforgiving. Dry grasses whispered in the wind, and the sun already pressed heavy on her shoulders. She remembered Elias's words on the trail. The land speaks if you learn to listen. Closing her eyes, she tried to recall what she had seen him do. Birds circling low often meant water. Her gaze followed a pair of ravens that dipped and wheeled toward a stand of willows. With trembling steps, she followed. Behind the curtain of trees, a spring bubbled from the rocks, its water cold and sweet. Relief flooded her chest as she filled the pouches. One task complete. But food was harder. The desert seemed barren, each plant a riddle of life and death. She crouched near a bush heavy with dark berries, her hands hovering uncertainly. Were they safe or poison? A soft voice startled her.
Not those. Clara turned to see little Fawn standing a few paces away, eyes bright with mischief. The child pointed to a patch of prickly pear cactus. Those pads, if you peel them, will fill your belly, and the fruit sweet as honey. Clara hesitated. Aren't I meant to do this alone? The girl only shrugged. The desert teaches. I am part of the desert. With that, she skipped away, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. Working clumsily, Clara cut several cactus pads, burning her fingers on the spines, but finally succeeded. She gathered fruit, too, their red skins staining her hands. By afternoon, her arms ached and sweat plastered hair to her forehead. Still, she pressed on, combing the ground for dry branches. Most crumbled at her touch, too brittle. But near the ridge, she found a fallen oak limb, sun-cured and strong. Piece by piece, she dragged it back until she had a pile large enough for a night's fire. As the sun sank, Clara staggered into camp. Her dress was torn, her palms raw, but she carried water, food, and firewood. She dropped them before Morning Star, chest heaving. The warrior woman lifted a cactus pad, inspected the wood, then sniffed the water.
At last, she looked at Clara with unreadable eyes. "You did not die," Morning Star said at last. "That is something." A ripple of murmurs passed through the gathered Apache. For the first time, not all eyes held suspicion. Some held the faintest glimmer of respect. Clara stood trembling, exhaustion pulling at her, but in her heart a seed of strength stirred. She had faced the land and endured. At dawn, the alarm spread through the valley like wildfire. Scouts burst into camp with grim faces, dust plumes rising from the south, cavalry riding hard. Not 30 men this time, but 50, and they hauled a small cannon behind them. Fear rippled through the people. Mothers gathered children close. Warriors checked rifles, bows, and arrows. Clara felt her heart lurch as she glimpsed the weapon from a high ridge. Iron and wood gleaming in the sun, the mountain howitzer rolling like a beast of thunder. Red Sky stood firm. "They mean to break our walls with fire," she said. "If the cannon speaks, our valley will fall." Morning Star spat into the dust. "Then we strike before it can roar. Who will silence it?" Every warrior stepped forward. The choice was life or death, and none hesitated. But Clara found her own voice rising above theirs. "Let me go!" The words startled even her. Silence fell. Dozens of eyes turned on her, some incredulous, others furious. "You," Morning Star barked, "you would walk into the lion's jaws with no training?" Clara's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "The soldiers expect Apache warriors. They do not expect a woman in tattered clothes. In the confusion, I might get close enough. If I fail, only one life is lost. If I succeed, your valley stands." Red Sky studied her as if weighing her soul. At last, she nodded to Elias. He drew a black-bladed knife from his belt, obsidian, its edge glinting like captured night. "This belonged to my sister," he said, voice low. "Carry her courage with you." Clara accepted the blade, the weight of it foreign yet grounding. When the battle began, chaos cloaked her movements. Smoke from rifles drifted thick, shouts echoed off cliffs, hooves thundered. Keeping low, she crept across open ground, heart hammering so loud she feared the soldiers would hear. Closer. The gun crew worked furiously, ramming powder and shot, their commander barking orders. To them, Clara was a blur of skirts, a harmless woman stumbling in the melee. "Get back, mess," one soldier shouted, turning briefly before returning to the cannon. That instant was her chance. She lunged, driving the obsidian blade into the sergeant's side. He cried out, crumpling. Panic erupted. Clara seized the ramrod and swung wildly, knocking another man backward. Powder spilled, sparks caught, the explosion was deafening. Smoke and fire engulfed the cannon pit. Clara staggered back, ears ringing, lungs seared by sulfur. The cannon's wheel splintered, its barrel tilted uselessly. The weapon was silenced. On the ridge, Apache war cries split the sky. With their thunder stolen, the cavalry faltered, retreating under the rain of arrows and rifle fire. Clara collapsed to her knees, coughing, the obsidian blade still in her fist. Warriors rushed past her, not to strike her down, but to cheer. For the first time, their voices carried her name with respect. Red Sky's words rang out above the din. "The white woman has shed blood for our people. She has faced the thunder and lived." Clara's chest still heaved with terror, but deep inside she felt something stronger. She had not only survived, she had fought. The valley lay quiet in the aftermath of battle. Smoke still curled from blackened rocks where the howitzer had exploded. Yet a heavier shadow settled over the Apache camp that night, the weight of survival. Winter winds whispered through the pines. Stores of dried meat and maize had dwindled after months of raids and pursuit. Without new supplies, many would starve before spring. The council fire was lit in the center of camp. Red Sky sat in the place of honor, her silver ornaments glinting like stars in the firelight. Beside her were Morning Star, fierce and unyielding, and Thundercloud, the scarred war chief. Elias stood at the circle's edge, his eyes never leaving Clara. "Our children cry from hunger," Morning Star declared, her voice sharp as a blade. "The settlers near Tombstone fatten their animals on grass that was once ours. Their barns groan with grain. Why should our people starve while theirs feast? We take what we need, by force if necessary." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the warriors. Hunger was a merciless enemy. Clara's heart pounded. She had tasted the settlers' way of life, knew the faces of families struggling in dusty fields. She also knew what starvation meant for children. Both truths pressed against her chest until she felt she might break. She rose, her voice trembling but clear. "I beg you, hear me. I know what it means to go hungry. But those settlers, many are families with little ones of their own. To raid them is to trade your suffering for theirs. Would we become like the men who chained me, who saw women and children as property, not people?" Morning Star's eyes flashed. Easy words from one who has never watched her kin starve. "Do you think prayers will feed our children?" Clara swallowed hard, then spoke the words that had carried her through the desert. "Whoever pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity, and honor." Proverbs 21:21. She let the verse hang in the air, the firelight catching the iron shackles still scarred around her wrists. "Our strength is not only in the bow or the rifle," she continued, steadier now. "It is in showing the world we are more than what they call us."
If you strike down the weak, the soldiers will claim they were right to call you savages. But if you show mercy, the truth of your honor will outshine their lies. The council murmured again, but this time divided. Some nodded thoughtfully, others scowled. Red Sky leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You speak as one who carries two worlds within her," she said. "The hunger is real, the danger is real, yet so is the choice. Wisdom lies not in the easiest path, but in the one that preserves the soul." Morningstar's jaw tightened, but she said no more. Clara sat down, her knees weak, unsure if she had swayed hearts or only delayed their anger. Yet for the first time she felt she had given not just her courage, but her voice. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. The council fire had burned low, its embers glowing red like watchful eyes in the night. Clara thought the evening's arguments had ended, but a scout burst into the circle, his chest heaving, his face lined with dust and dread. "They've taken a prisoner," he gasped. "A white officer, Colonel James Pierce."
They hold him at Fort Bowie. The soldiers spread word that they will spare his life if the runaway woman surrenders herself. The name struck Clara like a thunderclap. Her father, the man who had chained her future to Blackwell's greed, the man who had treated her more as an investment than a daughter, yet also the man whose voice she once trusted as a child, who had carried her on his shoulders to watch parades in Denver's streets. Gasps spread through the circle. Red Sky's gaze hardened like flint. "They mean to draw you out, Desert Rose, to bait us into folly." Morningstar stood abruptly. "Let them keep him. His blood is not ours. Why risk a single Apache life for a man who would sell even his own daughter?" Clara's throat tightened, her mind raced, torn between old wounds and the remnants of daughterly loyalty. Could she abandon him? Or would that make her no better than he had been to her? Thundercloud growled, "It is a trap. If we march on Fort Bowie, we lose more than a man. We risk the valley itself." Elias spoke for the first time, his deep voice steady. "And yet the decision cannot be ours. It belongs to her." His dark eyes met Clara's across the fire, unwavering. "This is your crossroad, old blood or chosen blood. No one can walk it for you." The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the night. Clara felt every gaze pressing upon her, weighing her spirit. Her lips trembled as she whispered, half to herself, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." Luke 14:26. The words burned like truth and fire in her chest. She looked at the council, her voice stronger now. "My father chose his path when he sold me into chains. He chose again when he sent men like Morrison after me. If he is held prisoner, it is not for my sins, but for his own. I will not lead you into a slaughter for a man who never saw me as his daughter." The circle was silent, save for the whisper of the wind. Some warriors nodded with grim approval. Others stared into the flames, unsettled by the harshness of her resolve. Yet Red Sky's weathered face softened. "Tonight you spoke not with fear, but with wisdom. The path is cruel, but it is yours." Clara bowed her head, feeling both the weight of loss and the strange lightness of freedom. For the first time in her life, she had chosen not to live in her father's shadow, but to step fully into her own. The valley lay hushed, the council fire little more than ash and smoke. Clara thought the night's trials were done when another scout burst from the shadows, his breath ragged, his eyes wild with urgency. "They come," he choked out. "Not soldiers this time, bounty hunters. Morrison leads them. He lives." The name froze Clara's blood. Morrison, the man who had dragged her in chains, who had laughed when she bled from iron cuffs. She remembered his promise in Devil's Canyon, "This ain't over." Red Sky's jaw tightened. How many? 24, perhaps more. And the scout hesitated, shame flickering in his eyes. They found the back trail. Someone showed them the way. A ripple of dread passed through the circle. Betrayal. The Apache had guarded the secret passes for generations, and now their sanctuary lay exposed. Morning Star snarled. Who, which tongue sold us for whiskey or silver? The scout shook his head. I did not see, but Morrison rides with confidence. He will strike before dawn. All eyes turned to Clara, suspicion glinting in more than one gaze. She felt her stomach lurch. You think it was me, she whispered, that I would lead him here? Elias rose swiftly, his presence like a wall between her and their doubt. No, he said firmly. She has shed blood for us. She faced the thunder cannon. Her loyalty is not in question. Morning Star crossed her arms, eyes hard as obsidian. Perhaps, but her presence has brought death to our gates, whether she wished it or not. Clara's voice broke, but she did not look away. Then let me stand and face what I brought. I will not run. The words surprised even her, yet something deeper held her steady. She remembered Elias's lesson in the mountains. The strength of the eagle is not in its talons alone, but in its willingness to protect the nest. Red Sky raised her hand, silencing the argument. Her voice was calm, but iron lay beneath it. The hunters ride with hate and greed, but hate does not guide our decisions. We will fight as we always have, with courage, with cunning, with unity. If one among us betrayed the path, the mountains themselves will bear witness. Tonight we prepare. Warriors scattered to their posts.
Women gathered children and carried them into shadowed caves high in the cliffs. The valley that had been a cradle of peace now hardened into a fortress. Clara felt Elias's hand on her shoulder. His dark eyes searched hers, not with doubt, but with quiet strength. "Fear not," he murmured, "for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-discipline." 2 Timothy 1:7. Her breath steadied. The scripture fell like cool water upon fire. Yes, fear pressed close, but courage burned brighter. In the east, a sliver of moon rose, pale against the stars. And somewhere beyond the ridges, Morrison's men closed in, like wolves scenting blood. This time, Clara vowed, she would not be their prey. The first light of dawn spilled across the cliffs, painting the valley in pale gold. For one heartbeat, Clara could almost believe the world was at peace. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, the crack of rifles, the hoarse shouts of men eager for blood. Morrison had arrived. From the ridge, Clara saw them, dark figures pouring into the lower valley, rifles glinting, spurs flashing in the rising sun. This time, Clara vowed, she would not be their prey. Morrison rode at their head, his wounded shoulder bound in filthy cloth, his sneer visible even at a distance. "Bring me the girl!" His voice carried like a curse through the morning air. "Alive, if you can, dead, if you must." The Apache war cries answered him, fierce and unyielding. From hidden ledges and rocky outcrops, warriors unleashed arrows and rifle fire. The valley erupted into chaos. Horses reared, men cursed, dust and smoke billowed. Clara crouched behind a boulder, Elias at her side, his bowstring taut. He loosed an arrow, the shaft striking true, dropping a rider before he could raise his gun. "Stay low," Elias urged. "They'll aim for you first." Clara's pulse hammered. Every instinct screamed to hide, to disappear. But another voice within her rose stronger. You did not survive chains and fire to bow now. A rider broke through the melee, charging toward their position. Clara snatched the rifle Thundercloud had given her. Her hands shook, but she leveled the barrel, breathed once, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder. The rider toppled from his horse. Clara's breath came ragged, but she kept her aim steady. Elias glanced at her, a flicker of pride in his dark eyes. "Good," he said simply. The battle raged. Morrison's men tried to force their way deeper into the valley, but every path narrowed, every rock concealed defenders. The Apache fought like the land itself, swift, relentless, vanishing and striking again. Still, Morrison pressed hard. He had numbers, and his men carried repeating rifles that spat lead faster than arrows or muzzle loaders. Each burst of gunfire chewed into the rocks, sending splinters flying. Clara ducked as a bullet struck inches from her head. Dust stung her eyes, smoke filled her lungs. She thought of Psalm 91, words her mother once whispered during storms. "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust." The verse steadied her heart. She rose, aimed, fired again. Morrison's voice cut through the clash. "You can't hide forever, girl. Your father's blood is on your hands. Come down, and I'll end this quick." Clara froze. His words were daggers, reopening wounds she thought closed. But Elias's hand brushed hers, grounding her. "Do not listen. His tongue is poison. Remember who you are now." Her grip tightened on the rifle. She was not James Pierce's daughter bound in chains. She was Desert Rose, forged in fire, standing in defiance. And this battle had only begun. The valley roared with gunfire and the clash of steel. Smoke from black powder hung thick, turning the morning sun into a blood-red disk. Clara's lungs burned with every breath, her ears ringing from the ceaseless thunder of rifles. Morrison drove his men with ruthless fury. He knew the land worked against him, yet he pressed hard, forcing the Apache defenders back inch by inch. At his command, a group of riders split from the main force, circling wide toward the eastern ridge where the defenses were thinner. Clara spotted them and felt dread churn in her stomach. "Elias, they're flanking!" He followed her gaze, grimacing. "They'll cut us off from the caves, if they reach the women and children." He didn't finish. He vaulted from cover, signaling to Thundercloud. A handful of warriors broke away to intercept. Clara rose to follow, clutching her rifle. Then chaos struck. From the smoke, a rider burst forward, nearly upon her before she could react. His arm snatched her wrist, yanking her from the ground. Clara screamed, struggling as the horse lunged forward, dragging her with it. Dust blinded her, the rider's laughter a cruel rasp in her ear. "Got you now, girl," he jeered. "Morrison will pay double for you alive." Clara clawed at his arm, her strength faltering. The desert blurred past. Panic threatened to consume her until she felt the obsidian knife still strapped at her waist. With desperate resolve, she wrenched it free and drove it into the man's thigh. He howled, loosening his grip. Clara tumbled hard into the dirt, the breath knocked from her lungs. The rider wheeled his horse to strike again. An arrow pierced his chest. He toppled from the saddle as Elias appeared, bow in hand, face carved from stone. He reached Clara in 2 strides, pulling her upright. "Are you hurt?" His voice was taut with urgency. Clara shook her head, though her body trembled. I'm all right, I think." He searched her eyes, then nodded once. "Good, then fight." Rifle shots cracked around them. The eastern ridge was a storm of smoke and fire. Morrison's men pressed hard, their yells echoing off stone. For every attacker who fell, another pushed forward. Clara steadied her rifle and fired into the fray, her hands no longer trembling as before. Fear still gnawed at her, but beneath it something fiercer stirred, determination.
Elias stood beside her, loosing arrow after arrow, his movements swift and sure. Yet even he knew the truth. They could not hold forever. Morrison fought not just for silver, but for pride, and his rage gave him strength. Across the valley, Clara saw him, Morrison himself, rallying his men, his eyes locked on her like a wolf scenting prey. His voice rose above the chaos. "Bring me the desert rose, alive, or I'll salt this valley with your bones." The battle was far from over. The battle narrowed to a single storm. Gunfire echoed against the cliffs, the cries of the wounded rising like a mournful hymn. Dust stung Clara's eyes, and every breath tasted of smoke and blood. Yet through the chaos, one figure cut sharper than the rest, Morrison. He rode hard at the center of his men, his face twisted with rage, his scar gleaming red against the dawn. His rifle barked, felling an Apache warrior at 30 paces. He spurred his horse forward, bellowing like a general drunk on fury.
"There she is!" he shouted, his gaze fixed on Clara. "The colonel's whelp, the fortune's key! Kill the rest! She's mine!" Elias stepped in front of Clara, loosing 2 arrows in rapid succession. One struck Morrison's horse, forcing the beast to rear. Morrison leapt clear, rolling hard, before rising with his revolver already in hand. The 2 men faced each other, Apache bow against steel revolver, silence pressing between shots. Morrison sneered, "I've killed better men than you, Redskin. Drop the toy and face me proper." Elias's eyes were cold as obsidian. "Your tongue is filth. Your end will be silence." Before Morrison could fire, Clara lifted her rifle and shot. The bullet struck his arm, spinning him back with a howl of pain. His revolver clattered to the dirt. But Morrison was not undone. With a snarl, he lunged, seizing Clara's rifle barrel. They struggled, strength against desperation, the weapon jerking between them. His breath reeked of whiskey and blood. "You think you can outfight me, girl," he spat. "Your kind was born to kneel." Clara's vision blurred with rage. Memory surged, iron shackles, her father's command, Morrison's laughter as she bled. No more. She drove her knee into his wound, forcing him back. Elias seized the opening, tackling Morrison to the ground. The 2 men rolled in the dust, fists striking, steel flashing. Morrison clawed for his fallen revolver. Elias grappled, his obsidian knife seeking flesh. They were evenly matched, fury against resolve. Clara scrambled, her hands finding the revolver before Morrison could. She leveled it, her breath ragged. The world seemed to narrow to the iron sight, the man's snarling face, the choice in her trembling finger. "Do it!" Elias shouted. Morrison froze, his gaze flicking to her. For the first time, Clara saw fear crack his sneer. Not because he feared death, but because he realized she had become more than prey. Her hands steadied. She whispered, not to Morrison, but to herself, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Romans 8:31. Then she pulled the trigger. The shot rang through the valley. Morrison jerked, eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing into the dust. The wolf had fallen. Silence rippled outward, brief but profound, before the battle roared again around them. Elias rose, blood on his brow, and met Clara's eyes. "You have slain your captor," he said softly. "Now you must face what comes after." The dust was settling. Morrison's body lay still, his men scattered or slain. The valley echoed with the weary cries of the wounded, the low moans of those beyond saving. Clara sank to her knees, the revolver slipping from her grasp. Her hands shook violently, though she felt no triumph, only the hollow weight of what she had done. Elias crouched beside her, his touch steady on her shoulder. "It is finished,"
he said quietly. "The wolf will not return." But even as relief flickered, another scout came rushing into the clearing, his face ashen, his breath ragged. He bowed low before Red Sky, then spoke words that made the blood drain from Clara's face. "Colonel Whitaker is dead, struck down on the road to Tucson." Soldiers whispered it was no Apache raid. It was his own allies, silencing him before his corruption could be revealed. The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara. For a heartbeat she could not breathe. Her father, once a towering figure of command and certainty, was gone. Not by her hand, not by the Apache, but by the very men he had trusted. She pressed her palms to her face, tears burning. Memories rushed unbidden. His booming laughter when she was small, the weight of his disapproval as she grew, the iron of his voice when he promised her to Blackthorn like a prize mare. All of it ended now in betrayal and blood. "I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought there might still be time, that beneath his anger there was something left of the man who once lifted me to see fireworks. But now there is nothing." Elias's eyes held hers, solemn but unflinching. "There is something. His sins are buried with him. You are free of them." Clara's tears spilled faster, yet with them came a strange lightness. The chain she had carried all her life, the chain of his name, his command, his will, snapped in that moment. She lifted her gaze to the heavens, whispering words that rose from the depths of her soul. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Psalm 27:10. The verse steadied her trembling. For the first time, she believed it, not as words learned in childhood, but as truth written in her very flesh. Red Sky stepped forward, her weathered hand brushing Clara's cheek. "The blood that bound you is gone. Now you may choose the blood that will keep you." Clara met her gaze, then looked around at the faces of the people who had doubted, tested, and finally fought beside her. Elias, scarred but steadfast. Little Fawn, watching with wide eyes. Morning Star, silent but no longer scornful. "My past has died," Clara whispered. "If I am to live, it must be here, with you." The firelight caught her face, not as the frightened daughter of a colonel, but as something new, something reborn from ashes and battle. The desert rose had bloomed. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. Night returned to the valley, but it was not the same valley Clara had first stumbled into, broken and hunted. Fires burned warm rather than desperate, their smoke rising steady to the stars. The people gathered, not in fear of attack, but in ceremony. Tonight, they would decide whether the woman once bound in chains would stand as one of their own. Clara sat at the edge of the great fire, her heart unsteady. She had faced death, hunger, betrayal, and battle, but never had she felt so exposed as in this moment. She thought of her father's house, where worth was measured in obedience. Here, it would be measured in something else, if she was deemed worthy at all. Red Sky rose slowly, her presence commanding silence. She carried a staff adorned with eagle feathers, its tip glowing in the firelight. Her gaze swept across the circle of faces, then fell upon Clara. "This woman," Red Sky said, her voice deep as the earth itself, "came to us in chains not of our making. She endured the desert. She stood against the thunder cannon. She spoke with wisdom when anger pressed us to folly. Tonight, we ask, does she remain an outsider, or does she walk among us as kin?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Morning Star stepped forward, her eyes sharp as ever. Clara braced herself for scorn.
But the warrior only studied her for a long moment before speaking. "She proved she can endure," Morning Star admitted, her tone reluctant yet honest. "The desert did not take her. The battle did not break her. I will not call her sister yet, but I will not call her enemy." That alone felt like a victory. Then little Fawn bounded forward, her braids flying, her smile bright against the firelight.
She held out a pair of moccasins stitched with careful hands. "These are for you," the child said proudly. "Now you may walk the earth with feet unbound." Clara's throat tightened as she accepted them. She had never received a gift so simple, so profound. Next, Elias stepped into the fire's glow. He held out the obsidian knife, the same blade she had carried against the cannon, the same one she had used to wound Morrison's man. Its edge gleamed black and eternal. "This was my sister's," Elias said, his voice steady. "Anaba was stolen, but her spirit lives in the fight for freedom. Tonight I placed this in your hand, not as a borrowed tool, but as your own. Carry her courage with you." Clara's hand shook as she took it. She could not speak, but her eyes held the answer. Finally, Red Sky lifted a woven band of feathers and turquoise beads. She stepped close, laying it gently across Clara's brow. "From this night," she declared, "you are not Eleanor Whitaker, bound to silver and betrayal. You are Desert Rose, born of fire and thorn, yet carrying beauty that endures. The Creator has written your name in this valley. We will not forget it." The circle erupted in voices, cries of assent rising into the night. Some called her name, others chanted words in the Apache tongue, but all acknowledged her as one of their own. Clara felt tears spill freely. For so long she had been a daughter without a father, a woman without a home. Now, in the heart of a people once taught to hate her kind, she had found both. She whispered into the fire's warmth, not to the council, not even to Elias, but to the one who had carried her through the wilderness. He turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water. Psalm 107:35. The words felt alive on her tongue. The valley seemed to breathe with them, the stars above shimmering like watchful eyes. The desert rose had been planted, and she would not wither. Dawn crept over the peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, washing the hidden valley in hues of gold and rose. Smoke from the council fires lingered like a veil, carrying with it the faint scent of cedar and sage. Clara, no, Desert Rose, stood at the ridge, watching the first light crown the land that had claimed her. She breathed in deeply, and for the first time in her life, the air felt wholly her own. No father's decree, no contract sealed with ink and greed, no bounty hunter's rope hung over her. Only the rhythm of her heart and the earth beneath her feet. Behind her, the valley stirred awake. Women tended to fires, children darted between lodges, warriors checked their weapons and horses. It was life, plain and unadorned, yet fierce in its persistence. To Desert Rose, it was more beautiful than the grandest ballroom of Denver. Elias joined her quietly, his presence as steady as the mountain itself. He carried no weapon this morning, only a strip of leather in his hands, freshly cut, its edges rough. "For a sheath," he said simply, nodding toward the obsidian knife at her belt. "A warrior carries her blade with respect." She smiled faintly, running her fingers across the black stone. "I never thought I would be called a warrior." "You were always one," Elias replied, his eyes searching hers. "You just needed to choose it." The words settled into her chest like a steady flame. She thought of her father, not with bitterness, not even with grief, but with clarity. He had chosen chains, contracts, and the illusion of control. She had chosen freedom. Both paths bore consequences, but hers led here, to this sunrise, to this chance to begin anew. The scout who had brought word of her father's death passed them on the trail, heading out again. Desert Rose watched him go, a reminder that the world beyond their hidden valley still turned, still schemed, still hunted. But within her rose a calm she could not explain, as if the valley itself whispered that she was no longer running, she was rooted. Elias followed her gaze. They will come again. Soldiers, mercenaries, men who see this land as something to own. They will not stop. I know, she said softly, but neither will we. He studied her then, as though weighing not just her words, but the strength behind them. At last he gave a single nod. It was enough. Below them, little Fawn came bounding up the trail, breathless with excitement. She carried a small clay pot, inside which grew a tiny desert flower, its petals fragile yet radiant against the morning light. I found this near the stream, the girl said proudly. It's for you. A rose for Desert Rose. Clara knelt to accept it, her eyes stinging with tears. The plant was no more than a sprig, clinging stubbornly to the soil. Yet in its defiance, she saw herself. She cradled it as one might cradle a child. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I will care for it as I care for this valley." Little Fawn grinned, then darted away, her laughter carrying across the rocks. For a long moment, Desert Rose remained kneeling, holding the fragile flower in her hands. Then she lifted her gaze to the heavens. "The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the rose." Isaiah 35:1. The verse echoed in her spirit, weaving together her old faith and her new identity. The desert was no longer just a place of exile. It was a place of becoming, of transformation, of God's quiet miracles hidden in thorn and stone. Elias touched her shoulder gently. "Come, the people will need you." She rose with him, carrying the clay pot close. The valley below awaited, not as a refuge, but as a home she would help defend, nurture, and rebuild. She had been hunted, chained, nearly broken. Yet here she was, alive, reborn, named anew. The sun cleared the last ridge, flooding the land with light. Desert Rose walked down the trail beside Elias, her steps steady, her heart unshaken. Whatever trials lay ahead, she would meet them as she had met every danger before. Not as property, not as prey, but as a free woman among free people. And as the day began, she whispered the promise that had carried her through the wilderness. "The truth shall set you free." John 8:32. As the fire of Desert Rose's journey fades into embers, we are left with more than a tale of survival. We are left with a mirror. Her struggle against chains and her choice for freedom remind us of the choices we each face, whether to yield to the pressures of the world or to carve our own path, however dangerous. Her courage is not confined to the Dragoon Mountains of 1872. It speaks across time, whispering to anyone who has ever longed to be free, to live not as property of circumstance, but as a soul created for purpose. If her story touched your heart, do not let it end here. Join us as we continue to uncover true Wild West stories, accounts of grit, faith, and humanity that shaped a nation. Subscribe, share, and keep walking with us into the untamed frontier, where history and hope still meet.